Good morning and welcome to University Unitarian Church. It's Sunday, November 21st, 2021, here in sunny, cloudy Seattle. My name is Beth Chronister and I serve here as one of the ministers, and it's really a joy to greet all of you for this special intergenerational service this morning, featuring youth and young adult voices on the eighth principle and the role of anti-racism and racial justice in Unitarian Universalism and within the religious life. A couple announcements before we begin. Just a reminder, and really it's a note of thanks. Thank you all for keeping masks on and participating here as a community in ways that keeps everyone safe. It is so appreciated to be able to gather together in person as well as with community online in these ways. A reminder that next Sunday we will begin passing the collection plate again to one another. So this was something that we paused during because of COVID, but understanding now that it is not really passed by surfaces, we are going to start that again next Sunday. If that's something that you are uncomfortable with, find a way to pass it by you, I guess. But we will figure it out as we keep figuring things out each and every week. I want to give a special welcome to newcomers and to anyone who wants to learn more about University Unitarian Church or Unitarian Universalism, and to invite you to an informal UUC info session in the Dix room downstairs following the service, and this happens each Sunday. I also would like to invite you following service to join with members of the Climate Action Team out in Nathan Johnson Hall in our fellowship hall to learn more about how this congregation has been involved in climate activism. And I also know that there are special treats, so please go stop by there. And as I mentioned earlier, this service is on reflections on the eighth principle, the proposed eighth principle. And if you would like to learn more about the eighth principle, or if you have a reflection to share, I invite you to join in Emerson downstairs immediately following the service today. And with that, let us begin our service.
The eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism is:
we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote
journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
Please rise in body or in spirit for our doxology, followed by our opening hymn, We Give Thanks. Doxology and familiar hymns, please listen and refrain from singing or humming for the safety of all.
Good morning, friends. I stand before you this morning in a spirit of gratitude. Three things. First of all, I am grateful for the fact that we live in a faith community that is a living tradition, that is continuing to grow and evolve and respond to the world around us. And I think you will experience that as you hear some of the voices who speak today. Second, I'm grateful for our ancestors and my peers, all of you who have been so generous with your time and your resources for such a long period of time that make this place what it is. And I'll call out for you one particular group, Camilla's Circle, we call them, a group of folks who have pledged through their wills to support this church after they're gone. And that was begun many years ago by a woman named Camilla Natvold. The room downstairs is her namesake as well. And if you want to know a little bit more about Camilla and where that all came from, I would direct you to the gateway this week. And third, I am grateful for the opportunity to introduce my friend, our dear Carolyn Rash, who has received so much and given so much to this community over many, many years. So will you welcome Carolyn Rash?
I stand before you with gratitude for all UUC has given me for over 50 years. I started coming when Al and I were married. His first service was the first one in this building. I left the religion that had been a part of my life for 30 years because I felt UUC was truly a congregation where one's actions speak louder than one's words. Social justice engagement was the initial reason why I joined, but as time went on, there were so many other rich experiences that kept me coming back week after week. UUC has afforded me many opportunities to participate in a variety of different ways and to engage in those things that I felt passionate about, most recently as a member of the building team. This community has been a significant part of our lives where we have made lasting friendships and have felt surrounded with love and support at difficult times. I find peace and joy being back in the sanctuary on Sunday morning amongst you, listening to the thought-provoking sermons by John and Beth, and hearing soul-touching music. I sit in awe of the thoughtfulness and wisdom displayed during the youth-led services. In a world that has been difficult to find hope, I always walk away from those services renewed and hopeful for our future. I want to ensure that the values we foster through our religious education programs continue long into the future. I am truly thankful that I am a member of this community with its caring and dedicated members and staff. In response to the many gifts we have received, we pledge our annual support each year, and we became members of Camilla's Circle many years ago. We truly believe this congregation is not for ourselves alone, but also for those who come after us. As we prepare to receive the morning offering, you can use the text to give, text UU Church, and your donation amount to 73256. You will receive a return text with a link to complete your gift with a credit or debit card. You can also place your offering in the collection plate as you exit the chapel. Please join me in reading the words projected on the screen. This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. When we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it.
The proposed The Unitarian Universalist principle centers the importance of anti-racism to our faith. It reads, "We covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." The eighth principle was written in 2013 by Paula Cole Jones and Bruce Pollock Johnson. Pollock Johnson is a white racial justice leader at the UU Church of the Reformation in Philadelphia, and Jones an African American former staff member of the UUA's Central East region. Paula Cole Jones noticed two paradigms for Unitarian Universalism, one being the 7 UU principles, and the other the concept of beloved community. In her 15 years of work with UU congregations, Jones realized that a person can believe they're being a good UU and following the 7 principles without thinking about racism or other oppressions at the systemic level. The 8th principle seeks to renew Unitarian Universalism's commitment to anti-racism, to hold ourselves accountable, and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. The 8th principle is a grassroots movement discussed and adopted congregation by congregation before it will go before the UUA's General Assembly in 2023. At UUC, the 8th principle process team has worked to gain support for UUC to adopt the 8th principle and to provide a discernment process for UUC members. We'll vote on adopting the 8th principle on January 30th, 2022. Today we'll hear youth and young adult perspectives on the 8th principle from 3 speakers, Clio Voss, Owen Dombrowski, and Maddie Smith. Now let's take a few moments to share with each other. I'd like you to turn to your neighbors and answer this question. Does racial justice and your religious practice overlap? If so, how?
Would you please rise now in body or in spirit for hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses.
Hello, good morning. My name is Clio Voss, and I have been coming to UUC for as long as I can remember. Some of the first engagement that I ever had with the Black Lives Matter movement was at this church when I was a lot younger. Every Sunday, in between services, a group would meet out in the courtyard out there for a silent vigil. We'd each get a sign saying Black Lives Matter, and then we'd go stand by the street as cars drove by. People would wave to us and honk as they passed by. We would reflect. It was a small thing, but it was really impactful to me as a 10 or 12-year-old. Being young, obviously, is a time when your worldview is somewhat in flux. You're not really sure what you believe yet because you're starting to realize that the world isn't quite the place that you thought it was. The act of holding a sign and sending the world a message made me understand what I was saying in a new way. Being in this space of reflection on what racial justice meant, even though my understanding of the concept wasn't super deep yet, was a way of giving it importance in my life. Hearing your community affirm that something matters is powerful. It gets you thinking about it, and this kind of reflection is where all meaningful action comes from. We have discussions about racial justice because talking about these issues means that they're important to us. And as an uncertain 10 or 12-year-old who still felt like it wasn't really my place to hold a Black Lives Matter sign, who worried that I was taking up space that shouldn't be for me, seeing the way that people around me were engaging with activism taught me a lot about how to stand for what I believe in without stepping on other people's toes or taking space that wasn't mine. My worldview may have been uncertain then, but honestly, I don't think I'm ever going to fully understand the world. I don't think it's possible to. There's too much complexity, too much nuance for there to ever be a clear answer to every question that's going to come up in our lives. That's exactly why I think it's so important to define our values, to say them aloud, not only so that other people will hear them, but so that we remember what matters to us. In a constantly changing world, we need to know what's important to us so we know what to prioritize, what will feel fulfilling to do, and how we want to live our lives. I think that's really what a church community is all about. Through conversation, sharing of experiences, or just spending time in each other's company, we gain a greater understanding of the world by sharing it with other people. That's what Unitarian Universalism is to me, a faith created through collaboration. In this community, we can influence each other's beliefs and each other's hearts. A space like this, where people are open to reflecting on themselves and on the world, is a powerful thing. We can't underestimate that. The things that we as a community uphold as our shared values are the things that are discussed, and the things that are discussed in this space can shape the way that we all understand the world around us. Adopting the eighth principle isn't the end goal. It doesn't mean that our work is done, but it's a way of acknowledging that this is work that we value and want to do together. That's what all of our principles are. They're values that we share, they're things that we discuss, and they're areas of the world where we want to make change.
Hello, my name is Owen Dombrowski. I'm a sophomore at UPrep, and my family have been members of University Unitarian for around 10 years. I took religious education Sunday classes at this church when I learned about how we value respect and compassion. Later, I learned about what it meant to believe in something or to find meaning. I also learned about the diverse sources that guide our living tradition, but I didn't think much about what it meant to act as a Unitarian until the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. During that summer, I engaged with the idea of systemic racism, which people who looked like me built for people like me. I learned that around 160 unarmed people of color have been murdered by police since I was born. I attended protests, I listened to Black Lives activists, and I read about historical struggles for justice. I also learned about the life of one Reverend James Reeb, a Unitarian minister and civil rights activist. After white supremacists murdered him after the March on Selma, his daughter Ann Reeb said that the Reverend was adamant, that one could not make a difference for people of color while comfortably living in a white community. I'm still very young and exploring what it means to be UU, but since last summer, I've realized that our UU faith doesn't call for just spiritual struggle for meaning. Our faith also calls us to struggle outside in the world for justice, for anti-racism, for dismantling of oppression and hate. We don't only be Unitarian Universalist, we do Unitarian Universalism. We practice a living and active tradition. The eighth principle is not a new addition to what we hold on to and practice in this community and in UUism at large. The idea of the eighth principle, to quote itself, is to journey towards spiritual wholeness by building a multicultural, beloved community with our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. As UUs, we already work towards building a beloved community, a community with care for everyone and where hate is absent. We acknowledge the evils of racism and other oppressions. Unitarians of color, LGBTQ Unitarians, and others whose identity has been oppressed, marginalized, or otherwise repressed throughout history have seen and experienced it firsthand. The eighth principle is an explicit statement of what our implicit values are, with the specific intention to work to dismantle racism. I give testimony to this congregation to adopt the eighth principle because I believe it is necessary to advance Unitarian Universalism's participation in social justice struggles and to promote a beloved community of care and acceptance here at UUC. In 1985, the UUA adopted the then new seventh principle, when humanity started to understand what our activity was doing to the earth. Now, during horrific police killings and mass social justice movements, more people are realizing the reality of systemic racism and are joining the struggle against it. The time is right to adopt an eighth principle to reflect how our living, dynamic, and active UU tradition guides us during today and tomorrow's struggles for justice. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm an old young adult. I wrote something nice and eloquent about beloved community and the eighth principle, and then the Rittenhouse verdict was announced on Friday, and I did not know how to get up here and talk about the eighth principle without talking about white supremacist violence. I imagine many of you felt and are still feeling a whole range of emotions. I feel some holy rage and sadness and grief, but probably like many of you, I'm not surprised. White supremacy is so insidious that beyond the violence done daily to Black folks and other people of color, there are many, many white victims of white supremacy. There are the white people Kyle Rittenhouse killed with impunity in Kenosha. Don't get me wrong, white people absolutely benefit from white privilege, but we have also lost something to white supremacy. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of spiritual wholeness as mentioned in the eighth principle. I think living in a society built on white supremacy has robbed us all of spiritual wholeness. I yearn for that spiritual wholeness, but at the same time, I cannot possibly imagine what that might feel like or look like, because I've always lived in a world where white supremacy is the norm. Racial justice has to be a part of my Unitarian Universalist faith, because none of us are free until all of us are free. One of the questions Melody sent us to reflect on was, what do you need from UUC to support your spiritual practices of anti-racism? I need UUC to continue on a path of having difficult conversations, and this means relearning or learning our history. This means truth-telling and lament. For me, this is also part of journeying towards spiritual wholeness. I want us to continue having conversations about racial justice and spiritual wholeness once the eighth principle is approved, and have those conversations not be limited to spaces hosted by the eighth principle process team or other social justice groups at church.
I want us to hold both the strong and long history of racial justice organizing and solidarity at UUC and the choice of the construction of our current church building in the 1950s in a red-lined neighborhood. I want to continue to lament with you all that Charlena Lyles was murdered by Seattle PD 1.5 miles from our church, and justice has not been served. I want us to think about what it might mean for us to reckon with the violence of our spiritual ancestor, Governor Isaac Stevens, a Unitarian that forced and conned Northwest tribes into signing treaties with the federal government, while we continue to worship and gather on unceded Duwamish land. I hope that we can lament and grieve all of this together. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness must involve this truth-telling and grief. I don't say any of this to upset anyone, to make white people feel bad or guilty, or to only focus on the ways in which white supremacy survives in our congregation. I say this out of a deep, deep love for all of you, for UUC, for this neighborhood and city we call home, and for Unitarian Universalism. I say this because of the hope of what we might be able to create together as a community. The thing I most want for myself and other white folks at UUC is for us to collectively understand that the eighth principle is not about punishing white people for their privilege. The eighth principle does not tell us that we will be punished for messing up or saying or doing the wrong thing. Accountability is not punishment. The eighth principle tells us that we are in this together, that we are all journeying towards an unrealized vision of beloved community, but that white UUs have failed and harmed our BIPOC siblings in community, and that we hear them and we believe them. I feel very confident that as a community, we will mess up, and we will likely continue to cause harm. This is not because we are bad or flawed, but because we are humans living in a country built on a solid bedrock of racism. This does not mean the work is not worth doing. This also means that this work is not optional for our community. As a faith-based grassroots climate and environmental justice organizer, I believe meaningful relationships in a faith community like ours are transformative and powerful, and eat away at those tricky little sinews of white supremacy. Without these relationships, we cannot journey together towards spiritual wholeness, and we cannot hold each other accountable in the work of dismantling racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. So, if you are worried that there is not a place for you in this eighth principle work at UUC, or do not yet see the deep love that drives it, there is, and you are needed and welcomed. Now, please rise in body or in spirit for hymn number 1017, Building a New Way. Those in the chapel are asked to listen and refrain from singing and humming.
Oh, how I look forward to the day when we get to join Ian in song and move together. But for the time being, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dwight, so much for bringing music consistently into our worship and bringing life with it. So this morning we close with prayer and meditation, and I want to start with gratitude. Gratitude for what was shared by Clio, Maddie, and Owen. Gratitude for what was shared among us when we turned and talked with our neighbors. And gratitude for this time as an intergenerational community. In this society, it is so unique. It's truly unique and special to come together across the generations, and we so need one another. So would you please join me now in that spirit of gratitude and the spirit of prayer. In the journey of racial justice and of being and becoming the beloved community, we travel along this long arc of the universe. And in this traveling, there is no arriving, not completely, but there are 100, 1,000 different ways to keep turning towards truth, love, and justice, to keep turning towards what is deepest within ourselves and what is deepest in one another. More spiral than straight line. There is no map that points to the promised land, that land where all are welcomed as blessing, that land where mothers no longer fear for the fate of their children based on the color of their skin, that land where redemption and repair have become part of the many ways that we love one another. That promised land of our collective liberation. There is no map, so listen closely to the wisdom of those who have gone before, the prophets who know that the path is not made by perfection, but by patience and persistence, courage and compassion. Listen to those who see further down the curvature of the earth, whose youthful visions project possibilities that break open the mind and expand the imagination, who are already embodying that future that is emerging. As this community sits with the question of not only who are we called to be, but how are we called, I pray. I pray for resilience, drawn from deep sources. I pray for that stuff of long-haul commitment. I pray for hearts that break open, enlarging this collective capacity to create change. I pray for the space to reflect and listen deeply to what is stirring, to listen for where we align and where we diverge. And I pray that our reflection is tested and transformed by action again and again. I pray for the courage to move at the speed of trust, at the speed of relationship. I pray also for a thirst for truth and a hunger for justice, a hunger which propels people with conviction even within uncertainty. And finally, I pray that we do this together, companions in doing the hard, necessary work of liberation, helping one another break the bonds of oppressions that live within the structures of our very souls and our institutions, and that we do this from a place of deep love. A love so deep that meets people where they are, but does not leave us there. Because all of us need all of us to survive. To these imperfect and in-process words, I invite you to add the silent prayers and reflections of your own hearts for yourself and for this community. I close with this quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Faith is taking the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. May we do so. May we discover together what it means to live so faithfully, to live justly, and to let love guide us through the long night. Blessings on each and every one of you on this day. Go with love. Go in peace. Go with a hunger for justice.